Who had the most gnarly, brutal, and visually shocking death in the Jurassic franchise? Today on Goji Center, we revisit these installments, ranking the worst deaths seen on screen, evaluating each method of killing and circumstance, while placing each kill in our special rankings method to determine who takes the title of most brutal human death in the Jurassic saga. Before we begin, because we know everyone's opinion is different, note that this is just our take on this matter. This is not an objective list of kills, but rather a subjective compilation of the Goji Center team's average opinion. Yours might be different, and it most likely is. So leave a comment below ranking your top 10 and see if it matches up. Each kill discussed will be scored from 1 to 10 by the following criteria. Shock factor. That's how shocking we consider the kill to be on screen. Taking into account choreography, spectacle, you get the point. Gore. Self-explanatory. How gory each clip is or how nasty the death is implied to be. Fear. How much fear is instilled on the character in question and the audience. Pain. How painful this death might have been. And a special one, dino brutality. How far out of their way did these creatures go to inflict pain and suffering? You'll find that some of these animals did maybe a little too much. Lastly, to avoid any confusion, this list only involves the kills seen in the last 7 films. No shows, tie-in video games, or books included. We can talk about those in another time. Alright, let's get started. The death of N.B. Nash. Is La Sorna home to one of the most dangerous animals in the entire saga and arguably still the most dangerous island in the franchise, despite claims that St. Hubert was more hostile. This island thrilled the audience with some of the most horrible kills seen on screen. The reason why this fellow was selected was because of the method he was mangled up before exhaling his final breath, along with the storyline reminding us yet again that he was eaten. Rewinding to Jurassic Park 3, after a disastrous landing and the crew one mercenary short, Nash was grabbed by the legs and lower torso, but note how the Spino didn't initially press his teeth into Nash just yet. Nash gets released on the floor, suffering from a 15-foot fall flat on his stomach. Adrenaline kicks in and he finds the strength to somehow still crawl away. But no, Spino steps on him, and here's where the director spared JP3 from being rated R.
Rent a car from our newest fleet yet. Your real car never has to know.
When your severe asthma says you can't,
this clip implies that Nash's upper body was brutally ripped upwards, consuming the entire body off camera, given we don't see any legs laying around in the following clip. This poor fella did suffer quite a bit before he died of shock from all the blood loss. The only remnant of his body was flesh hanging off Spino's teeth and blood still wet on the tongue. For shock factor, we give this a 5, since there will be much more visually impacting ones coming up. Hanging flesh and blood give this a pretty high gore score of 8. The screaming Nash and the time it took him to finally die gave this a fear score of 8 and pain score of 6. And dino brutality score of 6. Spino could have unalived him from the start, but decided to take a bit longer. Nash ends up with a score of 33. Let's move on to the next kill. The death of Dieter Stark. We're still on Isla Sorna, except during the events of Jurassic Park: The Lost World, one of the movies with the highest on-screen kill count in the series, and one that is most notable is the one of Dieter Stark, the not-so-nice fellow with the hubris that led to his ironic demise by the most lesser of creatures in Sorna, Compsognathus. Especially small creatures that in big numbers could evidently take on even the world's apex predator. After getting lost, relieving himself, Dieter slides down to a creek inhabited by a large group of compies, who then swarm him and begin pecking at his body, with the only noticeable wounds being on his exposed skin. This is important to note. Moving forward a couple minutes, and Dieter is relentlessly followed by the pack. The scared, tired, and weary Dieter jumps over a fallen tree only to find that this is where he will finally meet his end. Swarmed by even more compies, his screams of panic and pain are the last thing we hear as we see a pretty heavy amount of blood flow down the creek. Now, remember how the exposed skin was the only place where these little fellas could do damage? Well, given the amount of blood we see here and the fact that only his head, hands, and neck were exposed means that a good bite or claw injury was likely inflicted somewhere along the carotid artery. And this is something not suitable for a PG-13 movie to show on screen. The shocking amount of blood and slow, gradual progression of his demise gives this a 7. Not as gory as the previous kill, but some nasty off-screen implication going on gives this another 7. This fella's long time in agony and exhaustion and prolonged death by 1,000 cuts makes the bulk of this score with a 9 in fear and 8 in pain. These compies, however, likely didn't do anything out of the ordinary, since this is how they already likely bring down large prey. We'll give these a dino brutality score of 3, leaving Dieter's death with a score of 34, ranking a tiny bit higher than Nash in overall score. The death of Leclerc. We already discussed this death in detail in a prior episode, but today this dude makes it into our rankings because of the shock factor. That's right, folks, and this is something that is brought up everywhere in the fandom as potentially the most brutal kill in the latest installment. Never before in the franchise have we seen anyone get eaten in this fashion. Rewinding a bit, Leclerc was the one making all the racket that attracted the cats back to their nest, and unfortunately for him, he was the one who was likely the easiest to pick out given his exposed location. Terrified throughout his attempt to escape and possibly even swallowed alive without getting chewed up, given this big flying reptile has no real teeth. Leclerc made his way down the tight walls of the gullet only to be digested slowly, likely dying of asphyxiation inside first while getting burnt by acid. The gnarly spectacle of the bulge traveling down the Ketz's throat is something we weren't going to leave off of this list. We gave this a shock factor of 10. Gore factor of 5 since we didn't see much blood, but a score high enough to reflect the implication of getting digested alive. 8 for fear and 10 for pain because, come on. Dino brutality score of 3. Now, was the Ketz going out of its way to make Leclerc suffer? Not really. Real-life birds like herons, for instance, do normally eat prey in a similar fashion. No intentional malevolence seen here. Really, just a big bird being an opportunist. Leclerc's painful demise gets an overall score of 36, ranking above Dieter and Nash. The death of Robert Muldoon. Robert Muldoon, a very likable character in a very likable movie, killed by a very popular dinosaur. Muldoon's death makes it into this list because of both build-up and method. During the attempt to get the park's power back online, Dr. Sattler and Mr. Muldoon were trying to evade a pair of velociraptors who had already claimed a victim. R.I.P. Ray Arnold. The movie proceeds following Muldoon trying to outsmart the velociraptor, believing he has a clear shot, and having locked in on the raptor, a second one appears from the side. Very much in line with what Dr. Grant described in the beginning of the film on raptor hunting methodology. One capturing your attention, while another ambushes from the side. After surprising both Muldoon and, really, people watching the movie for the first time, things get a little dark from here. Instead of going for the insta-kill, the raptor goes directly for the face. The camera switches to the first raptor, who knew all along that this fella fell right into her trap, and now is just sitting there watching Muldoon's face get shredded. Now, these are intelligent creatures, and they likely know what they are doing. The raptor opting in for first shredding the face instead of other vital organs gives this a dino brutality score of 7, shock factor of 7. No blood here, but the implication of this dude getting heavily disfigured gives it a decent score of 7. Fear, 8, given how tense he was the entire time. 6 for pain, given he would have suffered, but not as long as some of the other deaths we'll see in a bit. Muldoon's exit ranks it above Dieter, Stark, and Nash, sitting right below Leclerc.
YouTube Premium is ad-free YouTube and the YouTube Music app all together.
Death of Ken Wheatley. Mr. Wheatley, a not-so-likable character in a not-so-popular movie killed by an actually quite likable hybrid. This one makes it into the list because of who killed him and how. After the fiasco at the Lockwood Manor, courtesy of Stygia Moloch, Ken's inner tooth fairy kicked in and just couldn't help himself to grab some fresh hybrid teeth, and he'd soon get a mouthful of them, duped into thinking the Indoraptor was fully tranked. Apart from getting totally outsmarted by a hybrid, this dude gets yanked by the limb, loses it, and sits there witnessing how his new torturer feasts on his own arm, which was brutally ripped off, by the way. These teeth don't come across as slicing weapons, meaning that either this was cut off by sheer pressure, or his own weight contributed to his own flesh and tendons ripping off and detaching from his arm. But that was just the beginning. Seemingly enjoying watching Ken cry like a baby, the Indoraptor proceeds to maul this guy further. Whether the Indoraptor was having fun, wanting revenge for this dude wanting to mutilate his grill, or just being a psycho. The reasons as for why the Indoraptor kept inflicting non-lethal wounds could be many. In this short instance, we can even see a glimpse of the Indoraptor eating yet another chunk of Ken, lacerating his leg muscles and possibly continuing to do so had he not been distracted. Shock factor of 7. Brutal kill, but we saw it coming. Gore of 9, at least by Jurassic standards. Fear of 8, pain of 9 for being mauled for a long time, and oh boy, the Indoraptor contributes with a dino brutality score of 9 for putting some medieval inquisitors to shame with this one. No need to prolong the kill to almost a full minute of agony. With a final score of 42, this tops the list so far. This honestly would have made the very top of the list had the amount of blood in this scene actually been realistic. The death of Ryan Delacourt. Ryan Delacourt met a very grim end while being eaten and interrogated at the same time. While Owen and Claire were looking for Maisie, Delacourt found himself tacked into a small arena where he ended up being the day's special. While laying on the floor after getting knocked, a small Carno and Lystrosaurus almost methodically had him pinned, biting both his hands. The Carno having the best mouthfuls and Lystro just happy to help. Spectacle-wise, this does look a bit gnarly, giving it an exceptionally high score of 9 for shock factor. What happens next might bump it up a few spots. Come the infant Baryonyx from behind and we see, or rather hear, the Baryonyx bite Delacourt's face and snap his neck. With at least 2 carnivores in the mix, it is implied that both of these would have fed on the remains of this fella had these two not proceeded to fight each other. Gore-wise, we'll give this an 8. Fear a 7 given his reactions. Pain 8 for the amount of time he was there, and Dino Brutality of 5. Not too high because these animals really behaved in a reactive manner, with the Carno being the aggressive dinosaur they are always portrayed to be in the franchise, and Baryonyx seeing a subdued potential prey item laying on the floor. Nothing too out of the ordinary given the current circumstance. Delacourt ranks with 37 points below Ken. The death of Sarah Young. Jurassic World introduced us to a new breed of pterosaur, one which was responsible for the exit of Simon Masrani and co., possibly many innocent parkgoers, and this gal. Zara, Claire's assistant and horrible babysitter, was the unluckiest of the unlucky few that got picked up by the horde of escaped pterosaurs that terrorized Jurassic World. And she didn't go off easy. After getting picked up violently by the first pterosaur, she then gets dropped in midair, picked up again violently by the legs, dunked in the water, then violently bit again, dunked, bit, yanked back up, and out of nowhere, violently crushed against the pterygoid teeth of the mosasaur. Going through a terrifying experience only to end up in the stomach of a mosasaur grants this spectacular exit a 9 for shock factor. Gore score of 7, given the implication that there was a crushed body inside the mosa after the jaws smashed shut. Fear of 9, pain of 8 due to the prolonged mangling, and a dino brutality score of 5. In this case, we don't really see a case similar to the Indoraptor, where this creature was going out of its way to instill pain. Here instead, we see pteranodons behaving like just regular animals that want to eat. But for spectacle and the horrible situation that Zara got herself caught in, her death ranks above Delacourt's and below Ken's with a total score of 38. The death of Eddie Carr. We're in Isla Sorna once again, and no top deaths list can be made without a T-Rex. One of the most memorable deaths, if not the most brutal one in this movie, one that nobody will ever forget after seeing it, was that of Eddie Carr. In the movie, after the buck and doe retrieved their infant, these two returned to the site that they had previously wrecked, only to find Eddie trying to save the people these T-Rexes had previously tried to get rid of. At this point of the film, one may have thought that the T-Rexes had already finished the job. But no, they returned, surprising Eddie and the audience watching, and the death that followed was nothing but traumatizing. Just ask any adult that watched that movie as a kid and ask them what character had the most, memorable exit. Eddie's suffering began when he felt a sharp, wide tooth pierce his leg, violently lifted and pierced again on the torso while the other T-Rex bit the bottom half of the body right off. Extra points for the gnarly sound effect added, implying that poor Eddie was pulled apart. Not really bit in half like we all like to say. Here's the video's high score of 10 for shock factor, gore of 9, fear of 10, pain of 8, given Eddie could have survived long enough to see himself traveling down the throat of a T-Rex, and dino brutality score of 6. Not too low, but also not too high if we assume T-Rex could have just as easily bitten down on the upper torso and ended Eddie's agony a lot sooner. The final score combined tops this list with a score of 43. We still have 2 more kills left to discuss, and we'll see if Eddie keeps the top spot.
Who wants to see a big explosion?
Now only on digital. Bring the Fantastic Four home.
Death of Dennis Nedry. One person that we keep hearing about time and time again is the infamous computer programmer who, in part, was hugely responsible for the demise of Nublar's Park in the film. Nedry makes it into this list largely due to the kind of death he suffered, and a bit of irony. While the unlucky bastard was trying to make his way, or his escape, to the docks, he lost control of his vehicle and was sent crashing into the wrong direction. As he was trying to self-tow himself back into the road, here comes the culprit. Dilophosaurus in the films is actually completely different from its real-life counterpart, and its counterpart in the novel. This is a completely different subject that we will cover in the future, so make sure you subscribe not to miss the video that will probably get banned from YouTube. After a few insulting gestures and comments towards the Dilo, Dennis now tries to climb back up the waterfall back to his stranded vehicle when, all of a sudden, this gooey stuff you see here is commonly referred to as venom in-universe, that if aimed at the eyes causes severe irritation and blindness. Nedry, getting a good dose of this stuff, stumbles back to his vehicle only to find that while he was struggling, the Dilo managed to sneak into his car, trapping him with the sneaky Dilo, and he proceeded to get mauled to death. Now, what makes this a bit more brutal is the fact that it is mentioned that these animals rely on this spitting venom to eat at their leisure, handicapping their victim, eating them even if they're still alive. This was implied and not really seen on screen. Gruesome nonetheless. Giving a shock factor score of 8, implied gore of 8, fear factor of 10 thanks to all the buildup and initial disdain turned to terror, pain of 9 because of the implication of being eaten alive, and dino brutality score of 6. A decent score for an animal that trapped the human inside his own vehicle. Dennis Nedry ranks with a 41, placing him among the top spots of this list. Before we reveal the last entry to our list, we'd like to quickly add some honorable mentions. The slaughter of many is something seen in a few instances in this franchise, such as that of the unlucky and unequipped Asset Containment Unit pitted against the Asset Elimination Unit in Jurassic World. Brutally manhandled with ease with a mix of both quick and not so quick gruesome deaths, this sequence is one of the most violent in this movie, quickly establishing that not even humans are safe from the repercussions of meddling with nature. Another crew that wasn't so lucky and possibly even had a more terrifying encounter with theropods was InGen's crew in The Lost World. Methodically picked apart and ambushed, it's safe to say that all of those who perished in this scene did so screaming in agony by a very intelligent predator. What you're looking at is yet another crew that fell victim to another, smaller, smarter pack. These raptors took out an entire crew of InGen mercenaries led by Indominus Rex. The audience was privy to their tactical cameras, and boy does it look like they did not have a good time. Here's Dodgson, who perished in a very similar way to Nedry, spat on and eaten, presumably alive. So this one could have been on our main list along with Nedry's, but since Nedry got soloed by one Dilo trapping him in his own vehicle, this was the criteria to keep him on our list. Our last honorable mention is the death of this dude, Robert Burke from The Lost World. He's on here because of this. Yeah, that crunch and the amount of blood implies a pretty nasty mess going on behind the waterfall. Either a crunch right at the skull or upper torso, that waterfall was the only thing between the PG-13 rating and generational trauma for the kids watching. A kill that perhaps was taken a little bit too far, contextually at least, was this one. The death of Udesky. Can Udesky's death top this list? Let's go back to Jurassic Park 3 to find out more. In this film, we are reintroduced to the raptors of Sorna. These, however, were a different variant than the ones we saw in The Lost World. More coordinated, with superior cooperative behavior, better pack communication than anything we'd seen prior, one would be left to wonder what atrocities could be done with that level of smarts. After the cast was chased out of the abandoned laboratory by these raptors, Mr. Udesky got unlucky enough to run into a pair of raptors that had some pretty messed up plans for him. The scene cuts to Udesky already on the floor, crawling away from the raptors, suggesting something had already happened to him. This raptor comes up from behind and sinks a nasty 6-inch claw on his back. Now here's where it gets pretty dark. Later on, we find Udesky laying on the floor, still but not dead. Just enough to draw the attention of perhaps another human that might come to help. And by doing so, attracting another potential meal. That's right, folks. These raptors used Udesky as bait. In the movie, this trap nearly worked. The injured Udesky, who was already fading away at this point, and the potential extra meal that was going to take the bait was already out of reach. So seeing that this dude was no longer useful, the raptor now comes in and finishes Udesky off. This very high level of intelligence that was leveraging the emotions of care and compassion against the humans is an alarming and brutal use of intelligence. The situation and method of killing calls for a high score for shock factor of 9. A decent gore. Udesky's death stands at a score of 44, topping Goji Center's list of most brutal deaths in the franchise.